Good morning. My name is Willis Eschenbach, and I'd like to start by thanking the organizers of the conference and to thank all of you for attending. I see Joe and Diane Bast have made it from Heartland, the perennial supporters of good science. So I'd like a big hand for the organizers and for the Basts. Now, some folks identify themselves as climate skeptics, while others say that they are instead supporters of the climate alarmism. Myself, I'm a climate heretic. I don't believe that the temperature of the Earth is determined by the amount of forcing. And I came here prepared to talk about my scientific research in that area and had a bunch of slides, but I decided I would do something else, and that is to talk about what we can do about climate change. And to do that, what I'm going to do is tell three stories first as context for a couple of quotes so that we can understand what we should not do about climate change, and then I'll speak a bit about what we can do. So let me start with story the first. In my 30s, as a result of a series of misunderstandings and coincidences, I spent some time as the first mate of a sailing ship in the Philippines. And at one point, we spent a couple months anchored up offshore from the Manila Yacht Club. And as befits a young man with more testosterone than sagacity, I used to spend my evenings in the red light district of Manila. Not paying for the favors of the ladies of the evening, you understand. I always found that to be a bit strange. But I spent the evenings in the dives and nightclubs and just drinking and having a good time. And one of the bars had a piano, and it became my habit to go there each evening after work. And I'd walk the 6 blocks over and I'd play the piano for a while. And I'd talk to what they euphemistically called the hostesses and the bartender, and watch the evening go by, and after a while I was just another fixture in the bar. And the people, the hostesses and the bartenders, I'd talk to them, and I got to be friends with a woman there named Helena. We weren't lovers, I wouldn't have minded being, but we just hung out together. We sang songs in the bar, and on the weekends we'd walk around the city and she'd explain the customs to me. And she taught me just enough Tagalog to get into bad trouble wherever I went. And during this time, she used to tell me I was rich. And I said, no. I said I was a very poor man in America, and it was true. I was an itinerant sailor and a fisherman and a boat bum. And she just laughed at me. But she never asked me for anything, not one penny, not one gift. But there was one other thing she wouldn't do. I kept asking her to invite me over to her place because I wanted to see where she lived. And she said, no, I wouldn't like it, gave me all kinds of excuses. So one afternoon, I decided I'd just go over there. I got her address from one of the bartenders, and he said I probably shouldn't visit there. It was in a bad part of town. But I was young and foolish, so I said, oh, no problem. So when I told the taxi driver where I was going, he turned around and he looked at me and he said, are you sure you want to go there? I said, yes. And he said, well, okay, but you have to pay me first, he said, because I'm not hanging around after I drop you off. So I paid him in advance and off we went. Helena's place turned out to be in a shanty town that had once been a city block of buildings that had been totally demolished and then abandoned. And as soon as I got out of the taxi disappeared. And I turned around and I was confronted with the most amazing warren of structures that I had ever seen. Now, I'm a builder, and every possible building material you might imagine was on display. The place was made out of concrete blocks and sticks of wood. There were old highway signs making walls. There were flattened out tin cans, random bits of glass serving as windows, hunks of corrugated iron, shipping pallets, everything imaginable, all lashed together with rusty nails, bits of wire, rubber straps, pieces of leather, sections of vine, duct tape, the endless variety of fasteners. They had buildings on top of buildings, underneath buildings. I asked the first person I met where Helena lived. He gave me a series of instructions that, as near as I could understand, included things like, go that direction, but stay on this side. And don't go under the third walkway, go where the man is selling balut. And be careful with the other opening. And all of these were delivered in what might have passed for English to a passerby, but seemed to be assembled from random phrases culled from instruction manuals. So I thanked the man and I wandered off in the general direction he'd indicated. I stopped occasionally to get new sets of unintelligible directions. And they led me over and under and through a 3D maze by a bizarre collection of passageways that were neither streets nor alleys. I couldn't tell public from private areas. Eyes looked out of every opening. I knew I couldn't find my way back without a guide. And the passageway wandered over and around structures, sometimes seeming to go through people's backyards, with life in full swing, weddings, ceremonies. At other points, the path went along this ditch running foul sewage that didn't bear close inspection. And after I'd accidentally looked at one piece of flotsam, I repented, and I quickly switched to looking the other way and not recklessly eyeballing anything until I left that ditch behind. Now, people mistake the Philippines for an actual nation, but it's much more like a really big family with kind of strange relatives. And on this city block of houses in Wonderland, of course, everybody knew everybody. And the nature of communications was such that by the time I got to Helena's house, the kindness of strangers brought me there and deposited me there, and she'd already gotten the news that I was coming. So she'd gotten spruced up and came to the door to meet me. She invited me into what she explained was her auntie's house. And she had a room in the back, and she offered to show it to me. We stepped inside the room. Of course, we didn't close the door. That wouldn't have been proper. And given the size of the room, it would have been difficult to close it with both of us in there. But it wouldn't have made much difference anyhow. There was no privacy at all. You could hear everything. The walls were paper thin. And I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised at that, because one wall was actually made out of paper. I noted in passing that the paper wall was made up of pasted together advertising posters for Hollywood, Bollywood, Hindi movies, and it gave a kind of a carnival atmosphere to her room. It was tiny. A little sleeping pallet took up most of the floor space, and inside that room was everything that Helena owned. Her possessions consisted of a small wooden box, which had a few dresses and blouses and undergarments, and another smaller wooden box, which had a few items of makeup, a small mirror, some trinkets and costume jewelry that obviously were precious to her. Other than that, there was one pair of shoes, and on the wall, a cross and a picture of Jesus. Well, there was a cloth pallet she slept on, but she told me that belonged to her auntie. And that was the sum total of all of Helena's worldly possessions, all contained in one minuscule room with a wall made out of paper to keep out the wind. That was it. A few dresses and a picture of Jesus. Now I understood why she thought I was rich. Because by her terms, I most assuredly was rich. In her world, I was incredibly wealthy. I talked with her a while in the room, in the house, and with her aunt. Her uncle was out working. Her aunt had a small business sewing there in the house. Life for them was not good, it was not bad, it was just life. Helena translated, her aunt only spoke Tagalog. We laughed some. They had a roof over their heads, albeit one made out of flattened tin cans nailed down as shingles. And they had each other. We watched the almost liquid warmth of the Manila evening pouring slowly over the city. And after a while, Helena showed me how to get back to the street and found me a taxi. I couldn't have found the street without her, and no taxi would have stopped for me at that time of the evening, but they knew Helena. She left me there. She had to get changed and get back to work. I said I was going back to the ship and I'd see her later and we'd play some piano and sing. And in the taxi on my way back to the ship, I reflected on how incredibly wealthy I actually was. And I realized with some embarrassment why she had laughed so heartily when I was so foolish and naive as to claim that I was poor. The only remaining mystery to me was how her laughter at my blindness had been so free of even the slightest hint of reproach for my colossal bumbling and my ignorance. Story the second. Fast forward 5 years. I'm working in sub-Saharan Africa and Senegal for USAID, doing surveys of the use of energy in villages in Africa. My workmate and I are out in some godforsaken village near the Kaolack salt flats. If you saw a 3D map of it, it would have all the topographical features of this rug. We get invited to dinner by a farmer, and by custom we cannot refuse. He lives in the proverbial mud hut with his wife, a raft of kids, a wooden planting stick, a wooden mortar and pestle for grinding grain, a 3-rock fire pit in back for cooking, a leaky roof, and not much else. I note in passing when we get there that he has 2 scrawny chickens in his front yard. When we go into the house, he confers for a moment with his wife. She disappears, and I hear squawking. I realize the man has 1 scrawny chicken now wandering the yard. The farmer and my associate and I drink sickly sweet tea, and we talk of the doings in the area. And after a while, his wife brings in the chicken, cooked up all nice, and offers it to us, the honored guests. The kids watch from the corners of the room. But I can't eat that damn bird. I can't do it. I can't bear the eyes of the kids. Don't misunderstand me. It's not like they're looking at me with reproach because I can eat it. That wasn't the problem at all. The thing I couldn't bear is the kids couldn't take their eyes off that chicken. Their eyes caressed it. They watched it, as the poet said, as one that hath been stunned and is of sense forlorn. They are blind to everything else. I can't take it. Plus, I'm shamed by the easy generosity of the man. They have nothing, and yet they've offered us half. I was reminded of Rabelais' will. I have nothing. I owe a great deal, and the rest I leave to the poor. The farmer's wife has cooked and served the chicken, both of them temporarily appropriating the easy air of people who have hundreds of chickens, people who have chicken for dinner every night. My heart hangs suspended. I hear the lone remaining chicken complaining outside. So I trot out my old threadbare excuse from Mexico. In Mexico, the peasants there blame everything on their liver. And I've found it's quite a useful excuse. Over the years, my liver has cheerfully soaked up the blame for a host of my idiosyncrasies. So I take one small bite of chicken for form's sake, and in French, it being Senegal, I compliment them on the chicken. And then I tell them the doctor has said the chicken is bad for me. I've said le médecin has said le poulet is downright mauvais for my greatly abused old foie. And so as much as I liked the delicious flavor and as much as I was deeply grateful for the honor they offered me, I'm terribly sorry. but I cannot eat any more. They'll just have to finish it off for me. And I tuck into the rest of the meal to prove my bona fides. They make the appropriate noises of disappointment that I'm not eating, and they have the grace not to look overjoyed. The children's eyes are full of expectation. They look at that poor, scrawny little representative of the great avian nation with unconcealed longing. The wife takes the plate into the back. In contrast to their early noisy play, the children vanish soundlessly on bare feet. It seems that this is not the time to get Mom mad. I avert my eyes from the disappearing chicken and the children. I look at the man and my workmate. We lapse into small talk with no reference to poultry or to children, chatting lightheartedly as though nothing meaningful had just occurred. And thinking on it now, I consider how many times I've bought some random chicken in the supermarket on a whim, and how little it represents to me. I could buy 50 chickens if I wanted to, 500 if I needed to, and I think about what that one scrawny chicken meant to that family. Story the third. Fast forward another 5 years, and I was living in the Solomon Islands in the South Pacific, running a shipyard on a really remote island. And so I used to see all the yachties that would come through on their nice yachts, and they would complain to me about the high prices that the Solomon Islanders were asking for their gorgeous wood carvings. Really world-class stuff. And after the first few complaints, I developed the following analogy, which I used over and over. I'd tell the yachties, imagine that one day an alien spaceship comes down and lands in your front yard. You run out to see it, and you notice that it is made of solid gold. It is encrusted with rubies, sapphires, diamonds. The alien steps out of the spaceship. His suit is picked out in cloth of gold and silver. He has platinum buckles and diamonds everywhere on his shoes, including Paul Simon's famous soles of his shoes. He comes up to you and through his universal vocoder he says, "My dear fellow, I rather fancy that old pickup truck of yours. How much money would it take you to convince you to part with such an astounding piece of history?" Now, you know your old truck is worth maybe $250, and that's on a good day with a following wind. And although we can't predict the future, you're pretty sure that this opportunity might not come again. So the real question is, would you tell the diamond-studded alien, "Oh, I could part with it for $1 million," or would you say, "It's a family heirloom, it would take $10 million"? Seriously, I'd tell him, you get a chance like that, you have to take your shot. You have to ask for the moon. You might not get it, but you have to ask. Next, consider the average Solomon Islander. The Solomon Islands is classified by the UN as a least developed country. Typically, a person in the village might see $100 Solomon a year. That's $30 US. I'd say to the yachties, your watch is worth $30 US. Your yachting shorts set you back $55. Your cool sunglasses, those aviator Ray-Bans, $75. Your belt was $30. Your stylish yachting hats, another $60. Your Sperry topsider boat shoes, oh, those are $95. Not counting your socks, not counting your skivvies, not counting your jewelry, what you're wearing is about 10 years' income for your average outer island Solomon Islander, and that's just what you wear as you pass through his world. It doesn't count what's in your pockets. Oh, you got a car key in there? In the other pocket, a wallet, credit cards, money. We haven't even gotten to that. Just what you are wearing. Not your bank account. Not what you might borrow if you had to. Just what you are wearing is 10 years of their salary. So why not ask $100, $1,000 for their carvings? Because to them, you're an alien in a golden spaceship with diamonds on the soles of your shoes. Now, be aware that these three people that I've talked about were not the poorest of the poor. Helena had a job, and she at least had paper walls to keep out the wind. The farmer in Africa had his farm, and previously two, but now one chicken. And the people in the Solomons have their bush gardens. The poorest of the poor have none of these. Now, I've told these three tales to provide context for a couple of quotes. And the context I am providing is that there is an almost inconceivable distance between those of us in this room today at the top of the heap and the people down at the bottom of the heap. We hear a lot about the 1%ers, and probably none of us here are part of the U.S. 1%ers. But I want to tell you that in terms of the world, everyone in here is part of the 1%. We are the winners in the game, the top few percent who enjoy the benefits of industrialization and all that cheap energy can bring us. It is a long ways down to that dark and mysterious place that we don't like to think about, where people live on $1 or $3 a day, and we wonder how they can do it. These people have no slack. They have no extra room in their budgets. They have no ability to absorb increases in the cost of living, particularly in the cost of energy. They have no credit cards, and they have no credit. They have almost no assets. A box of dresses and a picture of Jesus. They have no health insurance. They are not prepared for emergencies. They have no money in the bank. They have no reserve, no cushion, no extra clothing, no stored food in the basement, no basement for that matter. They have no fat around their waists, no backups, no extras of any description. They are not ready for a hike in the price of energy or anything else. They have a wooden digging stick, a paper wall, or a bowl of millet. It is in this context, the context that acknowledges that half of the population of the planet lives on $3 US a day or less, that I want to bring up these two quotes. The first quote is, somehow we have to figure out how to boost the US price of gasoline to the levels of Europe. That's $8 a gallon or so. And the second quote is, under my plan of a cap and trade system, electricity rates wouldn't necessarily skyrocket. Here's my problem with these brilliant plans. Regardless of whatever hypothetical possible benefit they might or might not bring 50 years from now, right here in the present, they are absolutely devastating to the poor. The late and unlamented, not late, but ex and unlamented U.S. Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu, the author of the first quote, wouldn't have his commute to work imperiled if gasoline prices went up fourfold. He can buy all the gas he wants. But if you're a single mom with a couple of kids living on the outskirts of Las Vegas, and you got to get to work in a clapped-out car that drinks gasoline faster than your good-for-nothing ex-husband drank whiskey before he left with his secretary, a doubling of gas prices means your kids will eat less. It means you will be able to provide them with less because you have to get to work. It's not optional. And if the cost of electricity for the U.S. skyrockets, President Obama who is the author of the second quote, won't be sleeping cold in the winter. And neither will you or I, for that matter. That would be the poor renter in upstate New York who can't afford to turn on the electric heater. Be clear that I don't mean this as a pejorative political comment. There are people on both sides of the political aisle who seem altogether too happy to increase the price of energy. But the difference between the rich and the poor, the difference between developed and developing, is the availability of inexpensive energy. Here's a curious fact for you. If a human being works hard, they can put out about 100 watts. And if you could work that hard for a day of 10 hours, like slaves used to work in the old days, that's a kilowatt hour. 1 kilowatt hour. We're rich because we can buy that amount of work for 12 cents in California, and I scream about that because that's way too high. We have to buy renewable energy. We're rich because we can buy hardworking electrical servants for a dime a day. And we make, well, I charge out at $350 a day. A dime a day is nothing to me. But this is critical for the poor, because the poorer that you are, the larger percentage of your budget goes to energy. If you double the price of energy, everyone ends up poorer. But the poor are hit the hardest. Increasing energy prices is the most regressive tax imaginable. Income tax, when it gets down to the lower level, people don't pay any. We say they're poor, they don't have to pay the tax. But the impact of electric cost increases and energy cost increases gets worse and worse down to the bottom. At the bottom of the pile, people are making $1 a day and paying 75 cents a kilowatt hour for their energy. And that's why they are poor. They have no room for doubling the price of gasoline. So I find it both reprehensible and incomprehensible when people in the 1%, that is you and I, and people in the 1% of the 1%, that is Stephen Chu and President Obama, blithely talk of doubling the price of gasoline and sending the cost of electricity skyrocketing, as though it would not cause widespread suffering. Those are ivory tower schemes of people who are out of touch with the realities faced by the poor, both in the U.S. and out. Now, when I was a kid, everyone was clear that cheap electricity was a godsend. It was seen as the savior of the poor housewife and the poor farmer. So we had things like the Tennessee Valley Authority around here that lit up the whole region to everyone's benefit. How did we lose that? When and how did deliberately making energy more expensive come to be seen as a good thing? I don't buy that line of talk for a minute. Expensive energy is not a good thing for anyone, whether you are rich or poor, and in particular, expensive energy condemns the poor to lives of increased misery and privation. About the only argument I see raised against inexpensive energy are the overblown claims that increasing CO2 is going to lead to some kind of Thermageddon 50 years from now. I've seen no actual evidence for that, just shonky computer results. And even if it were to lead to a temperature rise, I see no evidence that that would be harmful. As far as I'm aware, most of the energy rise has occurred in the extratropics in the winter at night. And I don't see many people jumping up and down saying cold nights in Anchorage winters are something that we should have more of. What we get with warmth is longer growing seasons. We get more ice-free northern port days. I don't see those as catastrophes. So I'm sorry, but I am totally unwilling to trade inexpensive energy today, which is truly the savior of the poor, for some imagined slight reduction in temperature in 50 or 100 years. Now, President Obama and the EPA have just imposed the new carbon rules. There was an analysis done of these. It appears that in 50 to 100 years, they will save us 0.02 of a degree of warming. Now, you know that as you climb up a mountain, it gets cooler. That's the way the atmosphere works. 0.02 of a degree of warming is the difference in temperature between my feet and my head. And I'm sorry, but I don't want to throw out coal power so that my feet can be the same temperature as my head. It's not worth it. Finally, for those that think the ideas of Stephen Chu and President Obama only affect the U.S., nothing could be further from the truth. The policies are being both exported and imposed by both force and persuasion on the world. To take just one example, pressure on the World Bank has led them to deny financing to India for coal-fired power plants. So the poor people of India are denied inexpensive coal-fired electricity. And that leads, of course, to disease and death. We saw that in our previous guest speaker saying, oh, they ran out of gloves. Oh, they don't have refrigeration. Those are the results of these kind of policies. So even if the dreaded carbon menace were real, increasing energy prices would be the last way on earth that I would fight it. It's a huge current cost for the slight possibility of the temperature difference between my feet and my head, and folks, that's not worth it. So, what should we do about climate change? My recommendation is fairly simple. We should follow what is called the no regrets option. If you look at all of the threatened catastrophes which are supposed to descend upon us from global warming, we find a curious thing. They predict we're going to have droughts. Gosh, I don't think we've ever seen any droughts before. And we're going to have storms. Well, that's kind of novel. We're going to have diseases. Diseases are going to surge around the planet. As our previous guest showed, that's been going on for over 3.5 million years. I don't know, since there was life on the planet. All of the threatened catastrophes that are supposed to come from the climate changing are with us today. They are the proverbial 7 plagues out of the Bible, with the possible exception of the rain of frogs. We have drought already. We have storms already. We have every climate catastrophe that they can imagine already. So what I recommend is the no regrets option. A no regrets option is a path that you can take which is of value whether or not the perceived threat is real. So if you are concerned, and some people are, and I can't blame them, people like to be concerned. If you are concerned about, let's say, future droughts because of global warming, hey, there's plenty of work that can be done on droughts today. So, for example, people today are teaching African farmers the way that their grandparents used to farm, by going out and laying out rocks in semicircles on their land and making just very small dams so that when the water falls, it doesn't just run down the hill. It's stopped and held and it soaks in. These small types of dams were once a feature of African agriculture in certain regions. They've fallen by the wayside with the advent of Western styles of farming. That is a no regrets option. If it turns out that I'm wrong, that all of us in this room are wrong, and we have to admit that possibility, much as we might hate to admit it, if we're all wrong, we're ahead of the game. We've already worked on the question of drought in Africa. Here's another example. There's a project called the SODIS project, S-O-D-I-S. Stands for solar disinfection. It turns out that if you take a cheap plastic Coke bottle, clear plastic, you fill it with water, you shake it up good and hard to get it well oxygenated, and you put it out in the sun, you will kill about 98% of all the pathogens. There are pathogens that it won't kill, but generally they're pathogens that not too much will kill. So it is a cheap and inexpensive way to sterilize water. This project is now going on around the world. If you're concerned about the outbreak of diseases from various weather and climate-related occurrences, join up with the SODIS project. If your fears are correct, fine, you're ahead of the game. If your fears are overblown, hey, no problem. There's plenty of disease-carrying water out there that could stand a good hint of disinfection. Here's another example. In Peru, up on the hillsides above where the people with money live, is where all the poor people live. It's just like in Rio de Janeiro. And in Peru, it's dry, it's desert down there. And what they found out is they can put up fog nets. You stretch a net of just like a gauzy material across where the wind is blowing through, and you put a pipe cut in half down at the bottom that it hangs into. And when the fog comes in, it collects on that, it runs down, and presto, they got water. Okay? What these plans all have in common is they are no regrets options. They are actions that we can take today that will affect the threatened climate monster that none of us in this room happen to think is real. But it doesn't matter if it's real because the benefits are there whether or not we are going to see a 1 or 2 degree temperature rise in the next 100 years. So that is my own prescription for what we can actually do to make a difference regarding the climate. Now, do notice that the things that have been proposed, like the shutting down of the coal plants, they estimate that'll make a difference of 0.02 of a degree in 50 years. If you want to make a real difference in the world, look around and see what weather-related phenomena are causing trouble and pain and suffering either in your area or around the world, and put your energy into that. Because that is a no regrets option. No matter what the climate chooses to do, those things will help everyone. I'm going to take a pause now and take questions on that. So if there are questions, please step up. And if not, well, I'll talk about something else.
I can talk loud here.
Good.
We have all the unrest going on in the Middle East right now. I'm sure it's like in the Gaza Strip. The electricity is very expensive, and these people feel it's riding all the time.
I couldn't tell you about the electricity prices on the Gaza Strip. However, the Israelis and the Palestinians seem to have settled on the only part of the Middle East which does not contain oil. So I rather imagine that energy prices are high. And wherever energy prices are high, people suffer. And so my own desire has always been to push for cheap, inexpensive energy of all kinds. Whether it is renewable or not is not the issue. The issue is, can people afford it? Because unless they can, it's pretty useless to them. So I don't know the answer to that question. I do know that, that the advent of fracking has opened up energy resources in a number of areas, and I understand that Israel is exploring some of those options. The Palestinians, sadly, seem to be caught in a spiral of you did it to me yesterday, so I'll do it to you tomorrow. And it's a tragedy that I see no easy way out of, and that will dominate their lives to the exclusion of energy or anything else, I fear, for many years. I mean, they're still fighting wars that for the rest of us have been over for centuries.
If you come to the mic, people who are here.
Well, I don't have a question. I am making a statement myself today because I'm wearing my Arizona GNT shirt, because I don't know if you know or not, but Arizona was number 2 on the EPA hit list for the coal-fired generation. Washington State was number 1. They have only 1 coal-fired generation unit, and it was scheduled to be closed, put down. So, in other words, number 2, meet the new recommendations, well, not requirements for Arizona, if we can't kill this whole thing with the EPA, is that we have to close down all of our coal-fired generation, except they can't do anything, I think, about the ones on the Indian reservation. So that I happen to be a cooperative, a rural electric cooperative member, and our only source of generation for the 5 cooperatives in Arizona, and there's one in Anza that's one of our group, in Anza, California, is that we have to shut down our plant, basically. We have no other source for baseload power. I mean, this is the kind of absurdity that the EPA is doing. States that are 99% coal-fired generation had very small requirements. So what they said it was going to be fair. They picked and chose. And they didn't choose Arizona. Maybe because we're feisty out there, I don't know. But so I'm wearing my shirt as a statement because as anybody that knows basic biology, carbon dioxide is the stuff of life. It's the source of life on Earth. I mean, we know that. The more carbon dioxide, the better plants grow. The more plants grow, the more oxygen for animal life, and the more food for animal life. I mean, it's so easy. And why does no one get this at the EPA and the federal government? Why don't they get it?
Yes, the coal regulations are particularly disturbing because they affect not only the U.S., they affect places like India. As I said, the World Bank is now refusing to fund coal plants in India. Now, you and I can live with less electricity or more expensive electricity. I mean, to tell the truth, our electricity costs could double and people in this room would be inconvenienced. But in the third world, where electricity is already stupendously expensive, the idea of cutting out coal is just, it's an abomination in my world. And I certainly hope that we can bring some sense to this matter before it gets too crazy. The levels that they are proposing for the restrictions on coal plants are totally meaningless. They're merely an attempt to shut the plants down for political reasons. It's crazy. I mean, the co-optation, I'm an environmentalist. Let me start by saying that. I spent a good chunk of my life as a commercial fisherman. And I'd love for my grandkids to be able to do it if I ever happen to have grandkids. The only way to do that is for us to conserve the fish in the ocean. So I am an environmentalist and a dedicated one. And the hijacking of the environmental movement by the anti-CO2 forces has been one of the tragedies of our generation, because most people that I know support environmentalism. We understand that we live in this whole ecology and ecosystem, and that if it stops functioning, we're in big trouble. But none of us here, I imagine, are members of the Sierra Club because of their crazy policies on energy and CO2. So it's the tragedy of the 20th century for me. I'm sorry, I interrupted your question. Go ahead.
Oh, that's all right. But I'm also with the co-op out of Florida, and yeah, we have a 40% reduction by 2025. We have basically the IPM models. EPA shut down all of our coal units, except I think we can keep one, and there's nothing we can do. I mean, they base it on an emission intensity pounds per megawatt hour basis. It's impossible for any unit to meet.
That was the purpose.
Yeah, and so, yeah, we have to have new generation with zero emissions, so basically nuclear. But, you know, I was wondering if you're going to ever take a look at those IPM models. Probably not worth looking at, but we have a train, we're already in the train wreck, I guess, of regulations. We have PM 2.5 regulations. We have the MATS, the mercury or toxic rule that'll come into effect April 16th, which is going to shut down about 80 gigawatts of power within the United States.
Yeah.
80, yeah. And so, and now this rule, which will come out next year, that I guess will be finalized next year, was probably going to shut down the rest. And so we need people like you to take a look at what I don't know who you're working with, but
I work with nobody. It's my strength in that I have no scientific education at all. Let me start by saying that. Well, that's not true. I have one college class in chemistry, one in physics, and one in calculus.
Well, models are not math.
But my math skills are strong, and my science foo is strong, and I'm probably the only person without a science degree of any kind to have a peer-reviewed paper in the journal Nature in the last 50 years. And I have other peer-reviewed papers that I've published as well, which I'm quite proud of, but which don't make as much difference probably as my blogging does, which is why I blog. I blog on the website What's Up With That, which is Anthony Watt's stupendous site, and that's where I do my science. I do it all out in the public glare, and I publish all my data and code as I go so that people can tell me where I've gone wrong, because it saves me time. I'm not trying to overrun you. Yes, my dear, your question.
Yeah, I really appreciate all the ammunition I got here last year, which I used when I spoke at the United for Coal rally in Kentucky in October. And they're trying to shut down our coal mining industry, of course. Mm-hmm. And I was contemplating driving over here, because you're 3 hours from where I live now. The actual greenest states in the country, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia. You all from Texas, don't you think Kentucky and Tennessee are green? And Virginia are coal states and tobacco states. What a coincidence. And you're missing the whole... Oh, and I have a sign on Liberty Van for about 6 years now that says, feed a tree, burn something. But after the coal rally, I changed it to feed more trees, burn coal. You're missing the whole point. It's not about the environment. It's not about any of that. It's about power. It's about control. It's about a Marxist takeover of the whole frigging world. You're evil. You're addicted to oil, therefore you're evil and you deserve to pay extortion. And that's exactly what they have done to tobacco smokers, isn't it? Thank you.
I can't say no to any of that. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Your emphasis on the regressive nature of increasing energy prices is interesting and I think extremely valuable. Not only because it's true. It's a critical point. That is, while the definitions of left and right are mutable over time, the classic self-definition of the left is the people who are concerned about the needs of the poor. They are the party of compassion. They are the secular version of Christianity. And yet, the left has embraced the policy of systematically rigging up energy prices, which, I mean, is remarkable and is a betrayal of their fundamental self-definition, is what it is. And I really think that point needs to be repeatedly made and attacked on that basis. That is, in classic terms, okay, Barack Obama's administration is the most right-wing administration this country has ever had, okay, in terms of wanting to shift the burden of taxes onto the poor. I mean, you know, sales taxes are universally recognized as being regressive. But think about carbon taxes. A $1,000 dress contains the same amount of carbon as a $50 dress. Okay? If they were taxed on the basis of price, it would be taxed 20 times as much. If it's taxed on the basis of carbon, they'd be taxed equally. So what that actually means is that the carbon tax is a sales tax where the rich are taxed at a lower percentage than the poor. Okay? You know, and I really think we need to make this point and to deny the people who call themselves liberals the honorable term of liberal, okay, the honorable term of people who have compassion. Okay, you know, used to be, okay, conservatives use their head, liberals use their heart. Okay, now the liberals use neither. And the, so anyway, that's what I have to say.
I can only agree strongly with that, and to say that, yes, it is the most regressive tax imaginable, because the poorer you are, the larger of a percentage of your energy goes to, of your money goes to direct energy costs. A rich man doesn't pay the same percentage of his $1 million a year for gasoline in his car as a poor man or a poor woman pays. The poor pay percentage-wise much more for their energy costs than the rich do. So it is a hugely regressive tax. And I agree with you that that is, to me, one of the key arguments, and it's why I made that argument here when I have the opportunity to speak, rather than making the scientific argument, because to me, expensive energy, the driving up of the cost of energy, is the crucial factor here, not the science behind it, but the effect that that has both on the poor here in the U.S. and even more so on the poor in places like India. They can't even build their coal-fired power plant because the World Bank won't loan them the money. It's madness to me. So thank you. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to correct the statement that was made by James, and I think by yourself, that Israel has not been blessed with hydrocarbons. And while that has certainly been true throughout history, that's not the case now. The Leviant gas field, discovered offshore in the deep waters of the Mediterranean in 5,000 feet of water, has 22 trillion cubic feet of natural gas.
Oh.
Verified reserves. And that will start production in 2017. And the Israelis have already projected they plan to export, because they will be energy self-sufficient with natural gas liquids and natural gas, 40% of that to their partners in the region. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Outstanding. Thank you for that.
I thought you might be interested in this. It's a political point. We had a measure on the ballot in our county, which was straight government overreach. They were going to put more controls on the people. And Noah studied that very carefully before we fought it. And he studied what the different voters would respond to. And he found that the Democrats responded best to that the measures would be bad for the poor. So he based his campaign partly on that. We won 79-21. We got half the Democrats to vote for us. So they really are concerned about the poor. And in this case, basically a Republican issue won because we educated the voters that it was bad for the poor, and you got half the Democrats.
You raise a most excellent point, and the way that I describe that is, never ascribe to malice what is adequately explained by ignorance. The problem is not that the liberals are bad people. they think they're doing good, just as we do, and they would be horrified and are horrified when I point out to them that in fact their energy policies are shafting the poor. And the ones that are willing to sit down and listen to it generally come away and go, I'm going to have to think about that, you know. So yes, for me, it is one of my rules to not ascribe to malice what is adequately explained by just, you know, people haven't thought it through or they've learned something different. I know it took me years to unlearn the things I needed to unlearn in my life, and I consider myself fortunate in my upbringing. You know, I mean, I had a good upbringing and folks that were pretty switched on, but even then, it's taken me years to unlearn that. So it is important to remember that the people that we are fighting against are not bad people. They are misguided people, and that ascribing their actions to malice is not productive. Thank you very much for that. I think we're out of time here, so thank you most kindly.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. And just we're going to have lunch now, back where breakfast was served, and that's in Salon B and C. Back out, go past the elevator, turn right, left, and then right again, and you'll be there.